or frills and with the aim of maximum force is this. If a perfectly loving God exists, then there exists a God who is always open to a personal with any finite person. Let me say right now, especially for the benefit of those who are immediately plunged into analytical fretting by such a proposition, that when I say personal relationship, I mean just what most of us would ordinarily have in mind when using that phrase: a conscious, interactive, and positively meaningful relationship. Notice also that this premise doesn't say that God would be perfectly loving. The premise says only that if God is perfectly loving, then a certain something else will be true too, something else involving personal relationship. As noted in chapter 1, logicians call this such propositions conditional propositions. We already saw some examples of if then or conditional propositions back there. One thing we can take from every single one of them is that the truth of what comes after the if and before the then would be sufficient or enough to bring with it the truth of what comes after the then. So in this case, the truth of a perfectly loving God exists brings with it the truth of there exists a God who is always open to a personal relationship with any finite person. Now, where you have the first thing, you'll find the second. This is what the hiddenness argument's main premise says. Take a look and see whether it strikes you as right. And remember, as you do, that any finite persons there may be will have been created by a loving God if such a God exists. Of course, having come through chapter 1, a variety of questions may be buzzing in your head. Here's one. Just what is this perfect love and this openness referred to by the premise? Good questions. Having seen, as you probably have, that the premise looks initially plausible, we now need to inspect it more carefully. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing our job as philosophers. Perfect love, as you may have realized, is here taken to be the best, the greatest, the deepest kind of love that could possibly be realized in God. It is ultimate love. Theism is an elaboration of ultimism, the elaboration that says the ultimate reality is a person, a divine one. So, if God possesses love at all, then this love must be unsurpassably great, more sublime than that of any mere mortal, and indeed expressed in an ultimate way. Such an interpretation I take to be justified and indeed mandated by the wider framework of religious investigation. And even if we can't know everything that perfect love would do or refrain from doing, it may be that we can just see, or that simple arguments can help us see, that it necessarily brings certain things with it. This is just like seeing, as Spielberg's Lincoln suggested we can in the film of that name, the truth of Euclid's common notion that things that are equal to the same thing are equal to each other. Or seeing with a bit of thought that, as Euclid also affirms, if 2x equals 2y, then x equals y. We can see these things even if there are hidden depths of mathematics humans will never penetrate. What we want to know here is whether we can just see that ultimate love would necessarily bring with it openness to personal relationship. I've already said what I mean by personal relationship. This is just the general and familiar idea of positively meaningful interaction between persons that they are aware of experiencing. In this connection, we should take note of a point that, once noted, will generally remain tacit, okay, unmentioned, but understood to apply to this premise. That is, that the scope of finite persons, the range of individuals to which that phrase refers, is restricted to finite persons who have the capacities needed for such a relationship, the capacities of mind and heart needed to be able to be in a meaningful, conscious relationship with God, which includes such things as the capacity to feel the presence of God, recognizing it as such, a capacity to exhibit attitudes of trust, gratitude, and obedience to God, and so on. Now, there might be a reason to suppose that if God existed, more people would have such capacities, but let's not get distracted by this. It would make for a different argument. All right. So the premise is saying that if God exists and possesses the greatest possible love, then God will always be open to a meaningful, conscious relationship with every finite person capable of participating in it. But what is the relevant openness? Here we've arrived at the very heart of the argument. I expect you'll have a pretty good intuitive grasp of what is meant by openness in this context. But let's look at the term more closely, for this will help to expose the great plausibility of the premise in which it appears. I want, in particular, to underline how thin or minimal a notion that we have here. Openness to relationship, as the argument understands it, doesn't require that God do any particular thing to pursue relationship, like suffocating us with attention or even politely asking for it. It's compatible with God standing back, as it were, and giving finite creatures some responsibility for how the relationship will develop, or even being experientially elusive when creatures respond presumptuously or complacently. It's compatible with God allowing creatures to close the door to relationship themselves and shut themselves off from God. It doesn't even require that God wants such relationship, though if perfectly loving, we might expect that something corresponding to this would be realized in God. No, being open in the relevant sense at a certain time simply means not then being closed. It means not through one's own actions or omissions, making it impossible for the other, whom one loves, to participate in personal relationship with one at that time, should the other wish to do so. Alternatively, and applying this now to God, it means that it will be possible for creatures who haven't made it impossible themselves through their own God-obscuring resistance of the divine to participate in relationship with God if they want to. They will be able to do so simply by trying to do so. Notice that this doesn't mean that trying will be easy. Perhaps what one would need to do to further a meaningful relationship with God would be very difficult. If thus open to relationship, God sees to it that nothing God does or fails to do puts relationship with God out of reach for finite persons at the time in question. Could our definition of perfect love rightfully be deprived of even so weak a relational condition as is represented by the phrase always open when it is taken to this minimal sense? The main premise of the hiddenness argument expects that you will say no. Love is deeply relational. And so how could God at some time count as loving John or Joan as fully and deeply and richly as God can if God at that time is preventing John or Joan from being able to participate in any way in a meaningful, conscious relationship with God? Such minimal openness as we've identified seems self-evidently to belong to divine love. To prime your intuition here, imagine that you're listening to your friend who's describing his parents. Wow, are they ever great? I wish everyone could have parents like mine, who are so wonderfully loving. Granted, they don't want anything to do with me. They've never been around. Sometimes I find myself looking for them. Once I have to admit I've even called out for them when I was sick, but to no avail. Apparently, they aren't open to being in a relationship with me, at least not yet. But it's so good, you see, that they love me as much and as beautifully as they do. If you heard your friend talking like this, you'd think he was seriously confused. And you'd be right. His parents, if your parents' description of them is correct, if your friend's description of them is correct, his parents could certainly be lots of other things, even impressive things, like the best corporate lawyer in the country and the president. They could set their son up in the best house in town with money and things galore. but their attitude toward him, whatever it is, doesn't amount to the most admirable love, since they are closed to being in a personal relationship with him. It may seem, however, that my words open and closed are getting too much of their power rhetorically. Being closed suggests never making a personal relationship possible. But such, it may be said, is certainly not the case with God. Even if at a certain time I am unable, just by trying, to participate in relationship with God, then if I want to, God may still make it possible for me to do the things that will give me such an ability in the future. Shouldn't this count as some sort of openness to personal relationship on the part of God? But for God's attitude toward personal relationship with you at the time in question, the word closed is perfectly appropriate. It's important not to get distracted from this point, and if it's hard to see why consistent openness should be built into our idea of God's unsurpassable love, then it may be worthwhile contemplating a bit the most obviously loving people in our experience. For such people, loving parents, siblings, friends, teachers, consistent openness is taken quite for granted. This is where things start in the story of their interaction with us. It seems rather odd for someone to take as a goal someone else's openness to personal relationship with them while holding that they are already unsurpassably loving toward them. Ain't this a bitch, right? Reinforcement. But suppose after a reflection on these points, the openness claim about divine love still doesn't seem self-evident to you, like Euclid's common notion. Maybe we can make it evident with a bit of discussion. First, be sure you've distinguished goodness in the sense of benevolence from love. Love entails benevolence, but goes beyond it. Okay, for God could be a well-meaning God and perhaps even perfectly good in the sense of benevolent to all finite creatures from a distance, without being open to such personal relationship as I've mentioned. Whereas what's distinctively wonderful about love, what makes us say that an unsurpassably great person must be loving in a way that goes beyond benevolence, is the desire of a loving person to come close, allowing us explicitly to share in their love. Of course, even this is something that they might do because of benevolence if we stood to benefit from such relationship. But here it's very important to notice that love values relationship for its own sake also. I don't know how many times I've had to correct in print the idea that I think that a loving God would be open to a relationship with us, mainly or only because such a relationship would contribute to our well-being. Sure, this might be expected to be a consideration, but it's pretty clearly not the whole of what a loving person will deem important, since otherwise one would be treating loving relationship just as a means to an end, and not as an end in itself. If that were your orientation when you love someone, then you'd be prepared to step aside as soon as you thought someone else might be able to make the one you love a bit happier than you can. So we must be careful to distinguish love from benevolence, remembering that the one who loves values relationship for its own sake. Everyone, no matter how traditional in their theological views, will accordingly be able to agree on at least this much. Divine love at some time must involve openness to a sharing relationship of the sort we've been talking about. Otherwise, it obviously couldn't be the greatest love possible. Moreover, suffering from no limitations of knowledge or power, or therefore of resourcefulness, an unsurpassably loving God clearly would love finite creatures at every time when they exist. Doesn't openness at every time follow? But something else that might inhibit this realization is the fact that non-ordinary circumstances can be imagined in which human beings might be loving without openness of the sort in question, at least for a while. Indeed, the benevolence part of love might conceivably come in conflict with the openness to relationship part. Contemporary analytical philosophers often enjoy thinking up examples of this kind, counterexamples to appealing general claims. Here's one that may fit our topic. Suppose Fred, out of a deep love, has been searching for his lost daughter Sally for many years. Today, he has finally discovered her whereabouts, and he could contact her. But she's right in the middle of a task that cannot be postponed. one in which success is reasonably taken by her as very important. And it's a task that she'd not be able to perform successfully if Fred entered her life just then. Maybe it's interviewing for her dream job, or competing in the Olympics, or performing a life-saving surgery. So Fred holds off. Now, by doing so, he from being able to participate in relationship with him just then, which means he's not open to relationship with her just then. But isn't this kind and even loving of Fred rather than unloving? Similar and perhaps more realistic examples can be imagined, such as the mother who, because of a murder conviction, has given up her beloved child for adoption, and who later shrinks from revealing herself to the child because she thinks great psychological or social harm for the child may come of it. What such examples suggest is that if we want a principle about love and openness to relationship that is perfectly general and necessarily true, we will need to say something like this. The best love, normally or ordinarily, is open to relationship at every moment of its existence. In other words, and a bit more precisely, things should be expected to be so wherever the lover has the resources to accommodate the possible consequences of such openness, making them compatible with the flourishing of both parties and of any relationship that may come to exist between them. And that qualifier, normally, may seem to some to send everything up into the air again, properly leading us back into uncertainty about God and openness. So let's see what we can do about this misleading seeming or appearance. One thing to notice is that the same loving impulse that is our focus entails favoring, seeking, doing what one can to realize a situation in which what normally is so indeed is so. Human love can't always manage this, but precisely because of their love, people like Fred and the mother of our second example would make it so, if only they could do so. Fred, for example, while waiting for Sally to finish her task, will mourn the fact that he wasn't able to be there for her from the beginning, getting to know the young woman who now attempts this task and perhaps also helping her with it in some way. And now for the critical point. If God exists as an omnipotent creator and an infinitely rich personal reality, then God can make it so. If also unsurpassably loving, God would make it so. To make use of the somewhat more precise expression from before, God has the resources to accommodate the possible consequences of openness to relationship with finite persons, making them compatible with the flourishing of all concerned and of any relationship that may come to exist between them. Yes, you say, but what if there are all sorts of good things God wants to have in the world and can only have by not being open to relationship with John or Joan? Who knows what aims God might have that demand at any rate temporary non-openness? This is a perennial suggestion in discussions like these, but there are two answers that should satisfy us in the present case. Remember, to begin, that God gets to set everything up in the first place. So, how, if perfectly loving, would God set things up? Add to the picture that God has created finite persons and loves them fully. Perhaps God didn't need to create them, but here they are. My question is this: doesn't the fact that God has created persons to love tell us something about the sort of goods God will pursue in the world we're picturing? If as much content or information as this appears in the idea of a divine reality we're working with, then we can know, at least in general terms, what aims will dominate. Loving aims. Of course, in philosophy, it should be an open question whether a God would create at all, given the limitless richness God alone embodies, if God is ultimate. But if we assume that God is a divine person who will create and will create finite persons, and thus that unlimited and unsurpassable love is to come their way, then in effect, we have a statement being made about what sort of world the actual world would be. And this means that we can't any longer shrug our shoulders when some anomalous state of affairs comes along, saying that there might, for all we know, be goods that justify it. Here's an analogy. Imagine a single man who marries and has children. Don't these commitments have a transforming effect on the goods he seeks to realize, at least insofar as he is a loving husband and father? Though when he was on his own, he spent time with various friends and was otherwise preoccupied with his own wide ranging pursuits, traveling to far flung regions of the earth for months at a time, shifting from place to place and from one activity to another. Now things are different, and quite naturally and rightly so. Now he has a family to help provide for, to support in emotional and financial ways. He can't just take off for Greece or France or Barcelona for long periods at a time to indulge in his own interests. Better, he has new interests, which lead him happily to say no when invitations to do such things arise. Similarly, with God, if God is to be regarded as a loving person, an ultimately loving person who has created vulnerable, finite persons to be the object of divine love, the God described by those who say that God might, for all we know, choose purposes quite unrelated to finite purposes to persons that require God for some time not to be open to relationship with them, isn't an ultimately loving being at all. Such a God would be comparable to a limited or delinquent father or mother who simply can't or won't live up to the demands taken on board when the commitments of marriage and family are entered into, which say wouldn't be God at all. What follows is that a perfectly loving God in the circumstances we've described would ensure that in the created world, all goods God pursues are, as I'll put it, relationship compatible goods. In any world that God creates with finite creatures bearing the relevant capacities, such an impulse must, as might put it, have framework status. Other things God does, God chooses to do within a framework or within parameters that impulse helps to establish, and the world God creates is in part structured by it. Again, God could do something else. God could create a world without finite persons or create no world at all. But any world God creates will be ordered by certain principles, with which some goods are compatible and others may not be. There's nothing surprising or theologically untoward about this. And in the world we're talking about, relational principles will be among them. I said there were two preliminary answers to the question about the suggested possibility of goods requiring God to be, at any rate for some time, closed to relationship with finite persons. So what's the second? Second is related to the first and responds to the idea that it might be out of concern for us, for finite creatures, that God is for a time closed to relationship with us. Not because of something calling God away to the cosmic equivalent of France or Barcelona. Maybe there's some important good that maybe there's some important good that's good for us and requires God to back off. Here's the answer. For any good improving the lives of finite persons that might seem to require God to be, for a time, close to relationship with us, there has to be a way for us to achieve that good or a good of that type in and perhaps precisely through relationship with God. This is again because of the nature of God. If God embodies ultimate value and is the deeper good and every finite good of creaturely life reflects, then no one could better become acquainted with such finite goods than by becoming more fully acquainted and in a personal way with God. God doesn't have to make the choice suggested here. Notice how the alternative view makes both God and relationship with God far too limited and unidimensional. God, by definition, would have to be the greatest possible, richest, deepest, most interesting, and most beautiful being. And so getting to know God would take a finite person forever. And in proceeding through the various stages of relationship with God, any of us should expect to encounter versions of the very goods that, according to those who oppose the hiddenness argument, might require God to prevent some finite creatures from having access to relationship with God. This might be the case if all goodness is in God. So God doesn't need to prevent anyone from having access to relationship with God in order to procure such goods for us. What I've said here may still sound a bit abstract, and it is. But it's just what's needed as we begin our discussion of the hiddenness argument to help us see how an objection appealing to possible greater goods may be vulnerable. In chapter 5, when we've seen more of what openness to relationship entails, we'll have a chance to consider against the backdrop we've here constructed specific examples of the goods that are at issue and see exactly how they can be accommodated by the idea of a non-hidden God. Straws. No, that's what it says. Don't look at my PayPal card. What the fuck? Straws. All right. I love this dude's vibe. Thanks, brother or sister. I'm not really sure. The boy says, I love you, bro. I love you too, bro. What's up, Brittany said. What up, Mo knows? Mo in the beach. Good evening, Dade. What's up, Dade? Bear here. Oh, what up, Jiffy Lube, the homie? I don't know. I wonder if he is. I hope he is. He's one of my mods. Him and Boogietron. There may be others, like Calacia. Calacia is also one of my mods. But I don't know if she's here yet. What's up, Brittany? Is it Brittany said or Brittany Saeed? Jiffy Lube. I need to make me a cup of coffee. If y'all was wondering, I'm reading this book called The Hiddenness Argument. Isn't that dope? It's not that big a book. Look how little it is. Like, I already read it once, but I just wanted to read it again. I'm on page 48, and there are only... And he got syllogisms in this bitch. I'm about to be using all that shit. What the fuck? Did I read the coda? I read the coda. Okay, so... Okay, so it's 123 pages. Like, that ain't shit. I should have been read it by now, but I be leaving it at work so I can read it on my breaks. It's sad just because I went through a troll phase. I said what I said. Ha! That's what's up. It's hot as fuck outside, allegedly. Bruh, it surely is. Like, it's... Yeah, it's a good day so far. It's Friday, son. It's Friday. I'm off of work. It's not a payday, like, you know what I mean? So it's that busted Friday. You know what I'm saying? It's that Friday that sucks. Because you don't get paid till the next Friday and shit. It's that bullshit Friday. It's that Friday I don't get that excited about. I'm only like low key excited because I don't have to go to work, but I don't necessarily hate my job, so I wouldn't mind going to work. Like, I'd be trying to go in on Saturday, but they don't let us go in on Saturday no more. Probably because they ain't got that much work. I don't know. I don't know why they don't let us come in on Saturday no more. I think it's personally because they watched the tapes of motherfuckers who was coming in on Saturday and saw that they was just bullshit and standing around. Because we don't have no managers on Saturday. So, like, you could just do what they was doing. Just on their phones, you know what I'm saying? Just talking to each other, holding conversations, flirting with each other and shit. But, like, doing, like, 20 minutes of work, but you there for like 4 hours and shit. It's like, y'all niggas just on the clock. Like, hell no. That's why they cut that shit out. But whatever. I'm sure they'll bring it back, hopefully around the holidays. We'll see. Hey, I got my med, so it's a good Friday. I agree. I know, right? But you know what, to be honest, I don't mind getting paid every other week. You know what I mean? Because my checks be like, I'm not gonna lie, I'm just keep it real with y'all. I don't give a fuck. I told y'all I was broke. Like, my checks on a good week are like, I'm gonna say on average, my checks be like $1,100 to $1,200. Like somewhere in there, like somewhere between like 1,000 something and like 1,200 something. If it's 1,200 something, I probably worked all week and maybe even got in some extra minutes or some shit throughout the week. But typically my check is like 1,100 something. You know what I'm saying? So, and that ain't shit, son. Like, y'all already know that ain't shit. But It's whatever. Anyway, I don't even know why I was bringing that up, but I do like the job. Like, it's okay. I don't mind. I get to like wear my shirts and shit. Like, I be wearing all the shirts y'all be seeing me wear. I be wearing that shit at work. Even the ones that like cuss and shit. They don't give a fuck. You know what I'm saying? Like, the one homie was wearing a shirt today that said, "Same shit, different toilet." You know what I'm saying? And then somebody else was wore a shirt that said something about like, I'm not in the mood for the dumb fuckery today," or some shit. Some shit she got at Walmart. Fucking, and then there's mine. You know, I got shirts that say, I don't wear none of the sun. Like, I got the one that says "fuck your God." I don't wear that one to work. Like, I don't even think I have that shirt anymore. I think I threw it away because I made my own "fuck your God" shirts that I haven't ordered yet, so I don't have any yet. But I'm gonna get some. But yeah, so I wear all that shit. Like, I wear my Antichrist shirts, my Hail Satan shirts, my Hail Sagan shirts, my Secular Humanist shirts. Not that there's anything wrong with those shirts, but you know, just my communist shirts, my Noam Chomsky shirts, my fucking Lenin shirts, my fucking Vladimir Lenin, fucking yeah, man. My shirt that says "Keep calm and deny Christ," or the one shirt that I have that says "Jesus died for your sins." What a fucking loser! Like, I got some dope ass shirts, bro. Like, most of them shits I got. Like, if they got like full ass pictures on them, I probably ordered it from T Public. But all the like really incendiary ones, like Jesus is a cunt and "fuck your God," I had those made. You know, like, you can't buy that shit nowhere. You know what I'm saying? But you can buy them from my channel, from my store. You can get them. I got all the best shirts. I got the shirts you can't get nowhere, for the most part.